So I want to tell you a little Shabbat story, if I could. Rivka, it was Shabbat afternoon, Friday afternoon. Rivka was getting ready, cooking, preparing the meal. They weren't wealthy. She had just enough for the meal to serve for her and her new husband, Heskel, when she heard a knock at the door. And as was often the case, it would be a beggar who would come by on Shabbat afternoon looking for a coin. And so she reached into her pocket and she walked to the door and she opened it. And she was shocked because it wasn't a beggar. It was a soldier dressed in white. And now, when one of the Shah's soldiers visited the Jews, it wasn't always good for the Jews. So she was a little nervous. But he looked at her and he said, "Can I come in?" And she said, "Why, certainly." And in his arms, wrapped in cloth and towels and blankets, was a heavy object. She didn't quite know what it was, but he came in and he plunked it down on the table and he said, "I've come to ask a request of you." It's hard to turn down one of the Shah's soldiers. She said, What do you need? "Would you guard this for me?" "Well, sure, what is it?" "It's a samovar." "What's a samovar?" A samovar is, you may even have one at home. On the bottom, you boil the water. On the top, on the bottom, you have the fire, and then you boil the water, and on the top, there's the tea that you keep warm, and you take a little bit of your tea, and you put it in the glass, and you take the hot water from the samovar, and you make your tea. When she said, "Well, sure, how long?" And he said, as he was walking out the door, 7 years. 7 years? She thought, what? She walked out to follow him and said, "I can't." But he was gone when she looked out into the street. And so she walked back in and she said, "Oh, now I'm the proud owner of this thing." And she took the cover off and she looked at it. Now she expected to see a bright, shiny, beautiful samovar that she was going to guard for 7 years, but she saw instead a tarnished, dented, seemingly not even able to work samovar. And she looked at it and she took her apron and she rubbed it a bit and nothing happened. And as she was rubbing it, she heard a knock at the door. She went to open the door. She said, "Oh, it must be the soldier. He must be back." But no, this time it was a beggar. And so she reached into her hand and she put a coin into the beggar's hand. The beggar said, "Shabbat Shalom." She said, "Shabbat Shalom." She walked away and she looked back at the samovar. And had she looked carefully, she might have seen that there was just a little bit of the tarnish coming off. And so she wrapped up the samovar and she put it up on a shelf where she knew it would be safe. And as she was bustling around the house getting ready, she thought, "Mrs. Gadushi, she lives down the street. You know, it's been a while since I visited her. Let me bring her one of my chalot. I have two. We can certainly spare one." And so she walked down the street. She knocked on Mrs. Gadushi's door, and she gave her the challah. Mrs. Gadushi said, "Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rivka." And she came back, and she hadn't been home for very long when her husband, Heskel, came in. He opened the door, walked in. He said, "I had the strangest day." She said, "I had the strangest day. Tell me about yours first." Heskel said, "Well, you know, I'm lucky if in a day I sell a glove or a pair or two. But today someone walked into my shop. He put on a glove and he said, 'What a beautiful glove.' Let me see the other." He put in the other. He said, "These are amazing. How much are they?" I said, 5 zuzim. That's my price. He said, "These are worth more than 5 zuzim. They're worth 10 zuzim. In fact, I'm going to pay you to make me 100 of them." Heskel couldn't believe his good fortune. If he moves that many gloves in a year, it's a miracle. And now he's going to do that many in 1 week. 1,000 zuzim, imagine it. And he told that to Rivka, and she said, "Well, my day was not quite as big, but it was also unusual." And she told about the Shah and the samovar on the shelf, and they got to eating and they forgot about the samovar. And as day followed day, some strange things happened. Heskel sold more and more and more gloves. And as he brought home more and more money, Rivka made food. Mountains of food, so much so that she distributed throughout the whole village. And she was known as the lady to go to on Shabbat Eve. If you wanted to have a meal for Shabbat, she always had plenty to give you. And she was so generous, and she would walk around and not just coins, but she would give money to beggars, and they helped to fund schools, made all kinds of wonderful things. And they then came to be known as some of the most generous people on their street. And before they knew it, 7 years had passed. And their lives were good. They had kids. They moved to a bigger house, and they continued to be generous. Now, not only did they make food on Shabbat, but Rivka opened a special kitchen so she could feed the hungry people during the week. And Heskel not only sold his gloves, but the extra gloves he made extra so that he'd give them to people who needed to keep warm during the winter. And their lives just got better and better and better. And then after the end of those 7 years, there was a knock on her door once again. Must be a beggar, she thought. it was Shabbat afternoon. That's when they came around. So she walked over, she opened the door, and there, standing right in front of her, was the soldier, dressed in his white uniform, just as when she first saw him. He hadn't aged a minute. He asked her politely, "Can I come in?" And she said, "Why, certainly." And he said, "Have you taken good care of my samovar?" And she said, "Well, we moved to the new house. I put it in the closet. Frankly, I haven't even looked at it. But we've taken good care of it. We protected it." He said, "Well, let's take a look at it." And so they went into the closet. They took it out, and they put it on the shelf. And Rivka said, "It's not really nice. It's kind of tarnished and dented and old." He said, "Well, let's take a look at it." And they took the blankets off of the samovar, and they uncovered it slowly, one blanket at a time, one towel at a time. And Rivka thought she caught a glimpse of something through the towels, and it was radiant and bright and shiny, and she couldn't imagine what was happening. And she looked around. Maybe the sun was shining through a window. Maybe that's what it was, but no. They took off the covers one after another, and there in front of her was the most beautiful samovar she'd ever seen. It wasn't tarnished and black and dented. It was silver and shiny and radiant and beautiful, and there was already a warm fire glowing underneath, and the tea was already atop of it, and she couldn't believe what was going on. And the soldier looked at her and he said, "I'm not a soldier. I carry this samovar with me and I give it to people. It's a lucky samovar. And if you take good care of it, you have all kinds of good fortune. But if you do good things for other people while you have good fortune, the samovar becomes shiny and beautiful. And clearly you and your husband Heskel have done nothing but wonderful things for the people around you. And you've become known, and I heard about you before I even came into town, that you were known as the most generous people in the entire village. This samovar is yours to keep. It will bring you luck, and as long as you do good things, it will always shine brightly." And with that, the soldier disappeared. And when they told the story to the Rebbe said, "I don't think that was a soldier. I think you might have been visited by Elijah, who visits good people and reminds them of their responsibilities to do good deeds in the world." And here's the truth about that samovar. It's just like our souls. You see, if we do good deeds in the world and do good for other people, our souls shine brightly into the world. If we're selfish and we keep to ourselves and we're mean-spirited, our souls become dark, just like that samovar. And so if you take away nothing else from this story, remember that our job, our responsibility is to let our souls shine brightly. You can see them in our eyes. You can see how our eyes sparkle when we look into the eyes of another. And we know that we've shined our souls just as Rivka and Heskel shined that samovar.